Hey everyone, so we're going to be looking at Mother a little bit more closely. I'm going to go through a couple of the key ideas in it and a little bit more of a close analysis, as well as looking at some kind of the overarching things towards the end and the way that it fits into the whole module. So get ready to take some notes, follow along, let's see how we go. Okay, the poem starts with this. I know now, as I did in my childhood wonder, that my mother dreamed of a paradise, one unbound by war and exodus. So we know from the title that it's going to be probably about someone's mother. That title has kind of two layers, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. And we start straight away with I know now. It's this sense of realization. They're noticing something. They've learned something about their world. And it says, as I did in my childhood wonder. This is kind of two-layered. Like we kind of, sometimes as kids we know things and then maybe we relearn them. Or maybe the poet had kind of a half understanding of it, but now they know more fully. So there's a few ways you could interpret that. It's really up to you how you want to see it. This idea of wonder in childhood is interesting, particularly when we start looking at where the mother has come from. That my mother dreamed of a paradise, one unbound by war and exodus. There's some contrast here, isn't there? There's the contrast between the paradise and war and exodus. Exodus is this idea of leaving a place. It's almost biblical in terms of its imagery that the slaves leaving Egypt was the book of Exodus, right? So it's this idea of escape into something and heading towards our promised land, if you like. That idea unbound is really useful as well, because it's the idea of unshackled. It's the idea of freedom. It's like, they're bound by war. The future is locked in by war. But by using that kind of imagery of shackling or chaining and then being unbound, we get this sense of freedom. Okay, on the living room carpet we sit. I pluck her grey hairs and ask, Mother, whatever was your passion in life? She smiles that eternal smile, a question suspended in midair. Okay, so this poem is framed by this. This is our framing device. We keep coming back to the fact that we're in this living room, in this extended conversation. The whole poem takes place across the in the living room, across this kind of afternoon, evening. And we keep coming back to this idea of plucking grey hairs, which I don't know if you've ever done that to somebody, but it's this idea that if you pull away all the grey hairs in somebody, they look younger, don't they? That's why people dye their hair when they get older. They want to look younger because grey is a signifier of age. And by plucking those hairs, we're going back in time. The mother is becoming a younger version of herself. And it's like a really kind of intimate moment. You wouldn't do this with just anyone. This is a very quiet kind of family moment. There's a closeness there. There's a physical closeness, and that translates then into kind of an emotional closeness and a philosophical closeness as they get into the memories and they travel back into the past. She smiles that eternal smile, a question suspended in midair. So this smile is it's kind of enigmatic. It's a bit mysterious. It's kind of just this kind of moment where she's thinking back. A question suspended, she's pausing. And the eternal smile, this idea that maybe she smiles all the time, but also it's a smile that is deeper than just a surface level smile, because she's going right back into time. So this idea of eternal and that links to this notion of time that we keep coming back to. Her neck tilts like a sunflower, too heavy to meet the sky. It's a great simile here. And so she's kind of like, she's really thinking, but there's a weight to it. Particularly this idea like it's too heavy. A sunflower is supposed to meet the sky, but if it's not, then there's something, there's a burden in it. It's not quite what it could have been. So it's a little bit reflective of the loss maybe that we're getting into. Gardening is a reply, I expect. So we're coming back to this like a plant metaphor that's come back a few times now, and will continue to come back. So we've had the sunflower, and then we have, in a way, I guess, the sunlight, weeding the mother's hair. I know that's a weird idea, but it could be there if you want to see it. And this gardening as a reply I expect shows that it's like sometimes we don't know our parents. Sometimes we don't really know them. We don't know who they were in their younger years. And so he's going, well, from my childhood memories, we had this great imagery of kind of home gardening and like this incredible like sense of like there's the kind of Asian style garden, the Vietnamese style garden, the lotus dotted ponds there, starfruit trees. There's kind of an exoticism in the garden itself for people who aren't familiar with those plants. They're not native to Australia. Most of not even cherry tomatoes, but through all these images, the memories that this guy has, the memories that the poet has from childhood are inaccurate because we're expecting gardening, and that's not actually the truth. When we're children, we have sometimes a very unidimensional, very one-dimensional understanding of our parents. We know them just through what we can see and what we interpret, but there's another layer, and there's more layers to people than we think there is. And so this is this kind of difference between expectation and truth. Teaching was my passion, she says. High school. I smile in agreement, and as I do, jigsaw puzzle pieces of memory lock together my past made whole. This is that difference between the expectation and then the reality. We had, the gardening, and then as she says teaching, suddenly the poet realizes a bunch of things. We have this moment of, maybe that explains who I am. You've had those moments where you learn something about your childhood or an ancestor, and a little bit of you makes a little bit more sense. This is what's happening, and it's like a jigsaw puzzle, because memory is an incomplete jigsaw puzzle. We never have the whole picture, and as we add little bits of information, it helps to reframe our understanding of our identity. So we are in a way a jigsaw puzzle of our past fitting together. So this metaphor is illustrating this idea that we are pieced together through our memories. And then my past made whole. That's probably an overstatement, because I'd say there's a lot more still missing, but it's this idea of realization and epiphany, E-P-I-P-H-A-N-Y, an epiphany, this kind of sudden realization about something true. A literacy teacher, I exclaimed. She smiles, remembering with excitement the moment I arrived home from school with a certificate of improved literacy. There's this connection between the journey that the poet's been on, learning and growing and being a certificate of improved literacy. It's kind of like acceptance in the culture where they are now. And that actually comes back to the mum's passion for those things that she's been investing into. I continue to pluck her grey hairs. Our conversation lingers on as the soft daylight illuminates us. We come back to this extended kind of metaphor of the grey hairs and this idea of moving back again, the mother looking younger. And it's, again, a framing device as we keep coming from the present to the past. Because that's how memory works. We're in the present, but we kind of come back to the past, we reminisce, and then we continue on in the present. As the soft daylight illuminates us, that illuminating maybe has a double meaning there. It's not just the illumination of the daylight, but it's illumination of understanding, of memory, of understanding who he is and who the mother is as well. I know now, as I did in my childhood, wonder about mother's youth before, and then we have a massive shift here before the bloodshed in Saigon. So it's been idyllic up until this point, these kind of nice moments, and then we get into this quite violent word, bloodshed, and Saigon, and suddenly we start to understand a little bit more about the context and the mother, and we bring all of that information into this poem now. There's this moment of, here's what we're talking about. I picture her driving a yellow scooter. Okay, we're back again we've changed from bloodshed, which was kind of like a massive handbrake and a whoa moment. Now we're back into these positive, pleasant images again. I picture her driving a yellow scooter on the road to school, the freedom of her hair. That there is a really nice double meaning there. It's metaphoric. There's literal hair kind of blowing in the wind, but then there's also the freedom in a more of an emotional or physical state, that there was a freedom to who she was. And it's a contrast to that idea of her head being bent like a sunflower. There's a weight. When she was younger, there was a freedom to it. The glimmering smile, spiriting past street markets, the soothing aromas of pho and lychee tea. So we're getting this really strong sensory imagery now of Saigon and of their life there. That familiar crescendo of rickshaws, bicycles and scooters, so we got some auditory imagery. Landscapes of water buffalo, visual. So we're going through the senses here. Ploughing the flooded paddies from cloud to cloud, each one picturesque from her classroom window, and all of which was the city she will no longer call home. So we've got this really lovely build-up of idyllic moments. Quite literally, he says it's picturesque, right? This is a lovely moment. It's fantastic. And then our semicolon indicates a shift, and we shift into this really kind of sad phrase to end up, all of which was the city she will no longer call home. There's a real sadness in that, isn't there? There's a sense of loss, because she's not there anymore, and these images are gone now. Now here the poet, we're really leaning heavily on this kind of grey hair thing, aren't we? More grey hairs fall, the past realigns itself. And I know now, as I did in my childhood wonder, that the teaching legacy passed down to me. Now we have an M dash here. This signifies, that's like an EM dash is how you write it. Signifies a break, an interrupted thought. There's this moment of, I guess, what's the word? Interruption. But a moment of shift. It's a change in thought pattern, because it's kind of, oh wow, and then I knew the responsibilities of providing for her children outweighed university degree teaching aspirations. It's a very clear statement there, isn't it? It's quite plain and clear, but there's a sadness to it. That in mind, I tell her mother, and he's trying to kind of reassure her in a sense that this loss was not for nothing. She's made this sacrifice, but it's not for no reason. I tell her mother, this week I taught my students Wordsworth, saw thousands of daffodils, and thought of you. This is referring to poetry by William Wordsworth, who's kind of an old poet from England. And it's interesting that as kind of, a Vietnamese Australian, he's teaching an English poet. There's this sense that he's got the understanding of, he's been able to cross cultures in a way, and now he's teaching quite a complex English poet, really. Saw thousands of daffodils and thought of you. That's kind of nice. Like, it's like, I saw a bunch of flowers, Mom, and it reminded me of you. And it's being reassuring. She smiles in response. And I'm taken back to a halcyon time in childhood, kind of like an amazing, like a fantastic time that reminds how she stitched floral pajamas, tablecloths, bed sheets together using a sewing machine for less than $5 an hour to afford rice, pork, Asian vegetables, and help pay for my tuition so I could learn to spell persistent correctly. This is one very long, complicated sentence. So we'd call a run-on sentence with an accumulation of ideas. The idea is to build up and build up and build up so that we get a sense of how hard the mother's been working, how overwhelming it's been, and everything that she was doing to try and keep things together. So we've been shifting between these idyllic images and these wonderful images, but then, wow, Mum really struggled here. She worked so hard to help pay for my tuition so I could learn to spell persistent correctly. Now, this word persistent is very deliberately chosen because the poets had to be persistent in learning how to spell persistent, but it's also a reflection and an adjective that describes the mother, isn't it? She's had to be incredibly persistent to do this. Praying that I might speak an unbroken English tongue and never be confined to the labours of factories. This idea of, again, sacrifice in order to provide freedom. Interesting, this idea of unbroken English tongue as well. There's a wholeness to it. And then we go back to our recurring refrain here. I know now, as I did in my childhood wonder, what it must have been to mother. There, and there's this understanding of the past again. There among the refugee boats thrown, the faces of Saigon watching, eyeballs ribboned with flames incandescent, a disorder of diaspora animate in the missile storm. What a great sentence, isn't it? There's such a rhythm to it, and such a rhythm to the sounds in this. The disorder of diaspora incandescent. There's kind of almost the sense that it's kind of reflecting the thrum of the boat. It's kind of like an engine just turning over again and again and again. And The faces of Saigon. This is this idea that there's people standing on the banks of the river. There's a big long river in Saigon that they may have been leaving from. And so people are standing and watching. There's people on the boat watching the city burning, eyeballs ribboned with flames. If you look close up in someone's eye, you can see what they're looking at. So we get this like massive close-up of the eyes of the people staring as the city burns. A disorder of diaspora, the idea of kind of a spread out people, a displaced people. Animate in the missile storm, again, really violent imagery again. So we kind of flick between these kind of nice moments and then the pain and the struggle and then violence. And we keep coming back to this moment where they're reflecting on that as a family, kind of in a nice present day moment. We don't really have any hardship in the very present moment aside from the mother's kind of disappointment in some of the things that she had to do. But it's paid off. It's paid off for her child. The homeland was a mist. The cerulean, like blue depths of sea, stirred on the horizon like some agitated womb, this idea of birth, right? A rebirth. Boats wet as one long vowel as the city crumbled, and my mother among them fled with nothing but me growing inside. So the poet was conceived, the poet was growing as she's on this boat. There's a really dramatic image of the mother fleeing Saigon, pregnant on this boat, watching the city burn. And just as the poet was born, like the sea, there's this sense of birth, isn't it? The sea and the city giving birth, leaving the motherland. So mother is about, I think the title, about the mother, like specifically, but also about the motherland, like about having to leave a homeland and find a new place. Okay, a few key concepts just to note before we move on from here. Number one, the motif of time that is running all the way through the poem. This constant switching between the present and the past, the ideas of grey hair, I know now, and then I'm knowing in childhood, and those things changing over time. And how that contributes to identity, puzzle pieces and the past falling into place. There's this really strong motif running all the way through of time and change and memory. Contrast. The contrast between the present and the past, between the mother's life and the poet's life, between the homeland and the struggle in the present, between her as a youth and then her in her old age, and between the memories and this kind of really homely, peaceful moment compared with the horror of war that we flick back to. There's lots of contrasts here. The enjambment. So enjambment is where we're running on to another sentence without using punctuation at the end. So there's a lot of places where that happens, but also there's kind of em dashes and there's semicolons, and the text is a little bit broken up in places, isn't it? It feels a little bit stuttery. It feels a little bit like, it's this idea of train of thought, like of memory. Our memories don't always work in a linear fashion, or in a logical way, even. I don't know if you've ever had that moment where you've been thinking something, and then you're like, how did I start thinking about this? And you've got to like work your way backwards and go, oh yeah, that's where I started. The enjambment reflects this kind of stuttering, halting, imperfect remembrance that's not quite linear, it's not quite perfect, it's not quite clean, but it kind of jumps backwards and it jumps all over the place and it's interrupted. And that's how memory is. That's how our recollections work. The idea of grey hair, I've talked about that enough already, but it's just worth noting. And the idea of gardens and growth. So the mother's garden, the growth, the womb, there's this idea of life and being born into something and growing and being free. Our final three ideas that we need to keep coming back to, the ideas of language, identity, and culture, and how they interact. So there's not heaps of stuff in language here, but there's a little bit. So we've got the idea of knowing, Wordsworth, this idea of literacy, teaching the language. We've also got that idea of language being an access to culture. So we've got to know the language in order to be able to participate in the culture. The idea of identity and how our identities are pieced together, how our identities are we have our notions of who we are, but then sometimes when we learn new things, or we learn things about our background, we learn things about our culture or our ancestors, that can change our identity. That can change the way we see things. There's a sense of memory and identity in this too. I just haven't written it down there. And then finally, culture. So the contrast between the life in Saigon and then life now. The idea of having to learn the language to be able to properly access the culture, in a sense. They're all operating in this poem. So I'm going to leave that there. Your job now is to keep going into detail with that, but I'll leave more instructions as we get there.